Okay, and welcome back. This video is going to be about test mounting the engine, and there's really good reasons to do that. So I've been sitting here playing with my engine and the engine mount, and come to find out the OS55 engine does not fit, will not sit down. You can see that, you know, this thing just will not fit all the way up to this. Now, I wish I had some other solutions, but I don't. I do own an engine mount made by OS that fits this perfectly. But the problem with that engine mount is it doesn't have a hole here for the nose wheel. So I'm stuck with this one. I thought I was going to use these little plates and hold it down with. Those little plates came with this little thing from the Nexstar, but they don't fit. I mean, I could use them, but they're because it won't sit down flat, it won't work. So I'm going to experiment just a few more minutes, but I think what I'm going to have to use is these plastic things like that, because if you put the plastic things on, then these anti-vibration mounts, then the engine will sit down with a little bit of persuasion here. Okay, that engine will sit down all the way as long as the plastic things are on there. Now what that's going to mean is the push rod that's going to come through like this is going to have to be bent and come over. That's going to have to be a very careful bend. But I think I'm going to have to live with that, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to play with this just to make sure I know how I want to do it. I'll be back and show you. Be back in a second. Okay, after much experimentation, I've come up with what I think is the way I want to mount this engine. And I'm going to use the mounts that came with the airplane, believe it or not. But I've got a twist to it, of course. So the first problem is that if you use these white mounts, these screws are a little difficult to get in, but not so bad. This screw here is next to impossible to get in, but obviously I did, and that's because of the needle valve and the little nipple here for the carburetor. And so you got to do it in a certain way, and I'm going to show you that to you in a minute. But first, I want to explain the other problem. In using these mounts, the white mount is extremely close to the push arm for the throat of the carburetor. Okay, and so if you try to use the usual clevis, even the plastic clevis, it doesn't work very well. It gets too close there, okay, and it rubs it. So the clevis doesn't work, and I'm certainly not going to use a plastic clevis even if it did work. But I don't think it will anyways. So I've got a different solution, which is use a Z-bend. So I've got a wire here with a Z-bend in it, and so when I go to mount the engine, I'm going to put this Z-bend into that arm, okay, and before I mount this, I'm going to experiment to figure out exactly how it needs to bend, because it will have to bend up and out a little to get a nice straight push. This way the clevis won't hit anything. Now all I've got to do is get this thing bent right to handle it. Now you have to go to a hobby store and find piano wire. This piano wire is let me measure again. Let's go. This piano wire is 1.38 millimeters. 1.38. Okay. The normal push rod is 1.81. Okay. So you can't use a normal push rod because the normal push rod won't go in the hole. It just won't fit into the hole, and you can't do a Z-bend on it. So you got to find a smaller piece of piano wire, put a Z-bend on it, and let me show you how I do that. Be right back. Okay, so doing a Z-bend on a piece of piano wire can be easy or hard. If you use two pair of needle nose pliers, it's hard. I use the Great Planes Z-bending tool, great little tool, and you just stick it on the end down here. Show you. You stick it on the end down there, and you squeeze it, and out comes a Z-bend. Okay, so I already squeezed it. I don't need to do it again, but that's what the Z-bend looks like, and doesn't have to be perfectly 90 degrees. It'll work just fine. And so that little Z-bend is going to be my solution. And before I finish mounting the engine permanently and the engine mount, I am going to temporary mount the engine mount, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this just as it is. I'm going to put the Z-bend on, and I'm going to put it up there, and you can actually, with the engine in place, you can mount the two bottom screws, and that's going to be enough to hold it. And I can, from that, figure out how to bend this wire to be what I want it to be, to get the proper bend on it to have it actuate the arm of the throttle. Be right back and show you how I'm going to do that. Okay. So the engine is there, but only mounted temporarily by two screws at the bottom. Okay. So what you're going to do is you got one screw here and one screw here. And by the way, the only way to get that screw in is to put it in first, because this needle valve is going to block you from dropping it in. Okay, so you get those two in, and then you drop in the engine. Okay, now you have to squeeze it pretty good to get it down where you need it. Okay. And it takes a bit of doing to do. Okay, here we go. Alright, so now that's temporarily in. Not going to be held by much. I'm not even going to put any screws in it at this point. But the purpose of why I'm doing this is to show you before you mount this engine, you got to make sure you have your push rod the way you want it. Okay, and I'm not using a clevis because the clevis is going to interfere with this screw right here. So after 4 or 5 trials with some wire that was too short anyways, I've come up with this design right here. Okay, so there's the I guess I'll show it that way. Okay, so there's the Z-bend, and then it's going to go out and up and then down and then in. Okay. So let me cut off one of my trials here. Okay. So now I can try this by making sure that it's going to fit right there, and it looks like it will, and it will do this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this back off. I'm going to put the push rod into the bottom hole of the arm. I'm going to slide this. By the way, this push rod's too short. This was a test, and I'm going to put that in there. Okay, and then I'm going to drop the 2 screws in just to temporarily hold it in place. Doesn't go anywhere. Okay. And all I'm going to do here is make sure that the push rod is going straight back, and it's not going to screw, and it's completely clear. The push rod is, let me show you at it from a different angle here. Okay, so you can see the push rod is angled out a little, okay, and then goes in right next to that, but clears it. And so that's the way you do it. I'm going to take this back out. Now here's what I suggest. This is piano wire and it's 36 inches long. Start at one end and do 2 or 3 trials till you get what you want. And once you get what you want, then you can figure out how long to make it. The length is going to be about 20, 21 inches, somewhere in that range. You'll figure it out. But so start at one end, do your Z-bend. I use the Z-bend tool that comes from Great Planes, and then determine the best way to do it. Now my method, as you can see here, there's a Z-bend. I went out to avoid the screw, which is right here, and then it angles up like this, then comes down, and then goes parallel that way. So that's how mine works. And it works well. Now that I got a sample that I like, I'm going to go make one for real. Be right back. By the way, my favorite pliers to do this is a nice pair of, I guess, yeah, these are Craftsman pliers with a square end on them, and that seems to work well.